Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I really enjoyed the conversation with David Deacon. He was one of those guys that I just looked up to so much when I was a teenager. He was, bigger than life. He was the race car driver, the motorcycle rider, very involved in politics, and a great business guy. It's inspirational meeting someone like that again, several decades later. At least for me, it is. And I think that the fact that he's had such a great life, personal career, etc., I think is wonderful, and it is inspirational for me. And looking to find those mentors when you're a teenager that even if you don't know them real well, but that you can look up to and try to emulate is wonderful. Anyway, thank you, David Deacon, for joining the show. I'd like to stress three issues that he talked about a little bit, if I could. And the first one was don't be afraid of failure. I've had my own failures in life, and some of them, not all of them, but some of them have led to some of my big successes. And I'd like to tell you a little story about that, if I could. When I was in first year of my master's in business administration degree, I went to Harvard Business School. I flunked my first marketing exam. And this was traumatic for me because I was, I thought at the time, a pretty smart guy. I had done well in undergraduate. I had graduated, one of the top people in my class at the University of Western Ontario Business School. I got a deferred acceptance to Harvard Business School, so I thought that was great. And I ended up going to Harvard Business School, which I thought was the best business school in the world. And I was really quite excited about it. And then all of a sudden I was interacting with a bunch of really smart people from around the world, people that had incredible jobs, incredible academic experiences at some of the top universities in the United States, Ivy League schools, in Europe, et cetera. And I was a little bit intimidated by my peers. And then the first marketing exam with John Whitney, who was a Green Beret in Vietnam. He was a tough guy. I flunked, and I was devastated. And I remember going to dinner and crying because I was convinced I was an admissions mistake and that I was embarrassed. I was going to have to come back to Toronto and try to get my job back and try to get the house back that I had gotten rid of and the car back that I had sold and reestablish my life after I had sort of told everyone I'm leaving to go to Harvard Business School. And I was devastated and embarrassed and shocked and humiliated. It was a huge failure. But that night I said, I'm better than this. I'm much better than this. And I committed myself to working really hard. And the one award, they don't give out, gold, silver, bronze kind of things. They don't give out top of the class. They give out at Harvard Business School an award called the George Baker Scholar, which is to the top 5% of the class. There's 800 people in the class. So the top 5% was 40 people. So it sounds like a lot, 40 people, but it's pretty small, 5% of 800 people. And I got out one of those pieces of cardboard that you put in your shirts when you get them in the laundry. And I wrote on it, George Baker Scholar, 1998. And I put it up on the wall and I read it every day and I looked at it every day. And anyone that would come into my apartment would see it. And they knew that that was my objective. And I worked hard. And 2 years later, or a year and a half later, guess what? I graduated at George Baker Scholar, which was one of the biggest accomplishments of my life. And I was very proud of it. But it's interesting when I think about it. Was it the work that gave me that? Yes. But if I hadn't failed, would I have actually worked hard? Would I have actually achieved it? And so I think that the failure was one of those things that I needed, that kick in the pants to be successful, to work hard. And so I think that failure sometimes can be the window to the kick in the pants to the avenue to your biggest successes, if you see it that way. I read a fascinating article in the New York Times, and it said that you've got to put failure into context. When we fail, our brains tend to catastrophize and then end up with psychological and emotional responses of actual fear. But it's possible to reframe your failures as necessary life experiences. Ask yourself, what did I set out to do? What actually happened? How did I screw up? And dispassionately examine the facts. Is it possible to make amends or course correct? Exploring these questions rather than panicking or blowing up your failure out of proportion. Learn how to pivot. Rather than wallowing in shame after a setback, focus on what you can do to move or change direction. Recognize the ways you might manage to pivot. If a relationship failed, as an example, you might try a new dating app or have a divorce party. I'd like to do that. Or take a break from dating and regroup. Measure your progress and success on progress and your learning. A failure is an end, but a pivot looks forward rather than backward. And then finally, this professor recommended encourage failure sharing. Humility and honesty are two essential ingredients of the fail well mindset. And sharing our fiascos with others minimizes shame, encourages truth-telling, and offers people a chance to learn from each other's mistakes. It normalizes the reality of failure for all of us and is deeply bonding. We all fail. If you don't fail, you're not trying hard enough. I had a professor once that said, if you never miss one plane, you're always wasting too much time at the airport. Probabilities are that if you're going at the right time, once in a while you miss a plane. I'm not sure if that actually made sense, but the idea of failing once in a while is actually very instructive. Anyway, I think that David talked about failures and how he learned from failures, and so I don't encourage you to fail, but I guess I'm saying don't be scared of it. And when you do, think about what you learned, think about what you got to do to get out of it, potentially pivot. And Jimmy Pattison, who I worked for, best boss I ever had, used to say, there's never a mistake if you tell me about it. But if you don't tell me about it, that's a real problem. Because if you tell me about it, we can learn from it. In other words, failure, if you learn from it, is a learning experience. Failure, if you don't learn from it, is a real problem. Anyway, that's comment one I wanted to make. Comment two is, and David talked about this a lot, and I went to a reunion for my high school this past weekend, which was really quite interesting. And it was interesting for me because in past reunions, everyone was asking, what do you do? And this time it was almost more of, who are you? What's important to you? Health was an issue. People are getting older. They talked about health a lot. They talked a lot about their families, particularly their aging parents. A lot of people had lost parents. A lot of people were divorced. And they talked about the divorce and how difficult that was, and or how wonderful it was on the other side. A lot of people talked about grandchildren, or how proud they were of their children, but then how much they loved the idea of being a grandparent. And I think that's really important, is that, and David again talked about this, it's not what you do as an occupation, whether you're an accountant or whether you're a business person or whether you're a gym teacher or whatever, it's who are you? Are you kind? Are you humble? Are you authentic? Are you generous? Are you friendly? Are you funny? Who you are is far more important than what you do. And then the third thing, and I think this is really interesting, David Deacon talked about how he was a motorcycle rider, a race car driver, CEO of Porsche, turnaround artist, politician running campaigns, artist, lyricist, and performer. And now in retirement, what makes him the happiest is performing and putting to pen some of his thoughts and poetry that turns into lyrics, that turns into music, to songs. And so I think this attitude of a varied life, of being a Renaissance man or person, of being a polymath, of not getting stuck in just one thing. We all live a long life. Having some variety is the spice of life. Having some different experiences. I had dinner the other night with a young lady as part of a convention that I was at. who's getting married. And she said she doesn't like jewelry, but she loves experiences. She loves travel. And so what her and her fiance decided to do is, rather than spend money on a big ring, they went off to Paris. And then they're going to do some other trips. They're going to have experiences. So this idea of being a Renaissance man or Renaissance person, being a polymath, experience varieties of occupations, varieties of experiences, lots of different trips to different cultures, different nationalities, different places. I think that's wonderful. And David is the best example of that. Motorcycle rider, race car driver, CEO of Porsche, businessman, politician, artist, rock star. What a great trajectory. But it's not a one line. It's a strange map. As I said to David, Einstein was quoted as saying, coincidences are God's way of staying anonymous. One of my favorite books, The Alchemist, was all about omens that you meet along the way will show you the path of where the universe wants you to go. I love that. And so therefore, I think that the three things I wanted to leave you with after my interview with David Deacon tonight was, number one, don't fear failure. Learn from it. Number two, think about who you are and who other people are rather than what you do or what they do. And then finally, think about variety in your life. Be a Renaissance man. Anyway, that's my show for tonight. Thanks so much for joining us. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and videocasts are available on my website, briancrombie.com. Check me out sometime. Thanks. Good night, everybody.